approximately 20 master students starting and about 3 PhDs. Tonight I will focus on the master program. It is an internationally oriented English language program which is open to people from all disciplines, but has a qualitative selection process before that. Our student body actually spans the globe from Asia to North and South Americas, from Australia over Africa to Europe, and that's actually really fascinating to have so many people at the same time in one room with so many different experiences. They come from the natural sciences, engineering, business, the social sciences, and humanities. From the start, our program has been struggling with setting up a teaching and learning infrastructure which allows an STS mindset to develop and to share with our students our experiences, our knowledge, and our perspectives, which they can take along wherever they end up after having done the master. Only a small part of them continues into a PhD program. Some of them are here in some of the STS programs in the States, and I'm very happy about that. To my view, STS actually faces in these environments two big challenges when it comes to engaging in formalized programming. And the first is how to explain what the core of STS is without being all too normative and too exclusionary, without erecting firm walls and saying that's STS and that's not. So how to create a space in which their interdisciplinary and their cultural different individual backgrounds and experiences are valued actually, but at the same time guiding them to see the world with different eyes. I think the strength of our field is, and always was, its openness towards developments in other disciplines. I think its weaknesses is also that it has always been open to other fields and disciplines, and thus partly not having clear contours and not wanting to have maybe sometimes these clear contours while wanting to be the field at the same, a field that reunites people at the same time. In short, the challenge is to create a learning environment which provides clear guidance into STS and supports development of STS sensitivities, but values differences, heterogeneities embodied in the young master students. So how did we go about to do so? Actually, we tried to introduce STS in 4 ways of looking at things. And these ways of looking at things is, first of all, asking questions and identifying concerns. Second, a way of developing and using different theoretical perspectives and to unpack and understand and describe what is at stake. A way of STS being a method and STS using methods from different disciplines, showing how methods are always necessarily performative and not simple tools which help us to represent the world as it is. And finally, the yellow circle around is a way how we work and deal with knowledge from other places, how we collect and assess information, what are the practicalities and ethical challenges we are confronted with STS. Now, that's a quite classical way to look at things, yet we try to kind of bring them together and not to keep them apart. And we bring them together through having developed a kind of case-based learning approach, for which we have, by the way, been awarded in the Austrian context with a national award, Karlsruhe for innovative teaching in social sciences, and we are quite proud of that. Every year, the incoming students cohort is divided in 4 groups, as diverse as possible, with which backgrounds they have, where they come from, what kind of gender, age groups, and things like that. So to build mixed groups, and we attribute them a case or an issue of concern, and that is their virtual laboratory on which they have to work throughout the 4 cases. So we don't leave them separated. The teachers have to work together, supported by TAs, to make them work up through these different lenses, these cases. The cases get elaborated by the students in the different classes. Questions are being formulated, tried out, taken further, dismissed. Theoretical framings are played with. Methodological questions scrutinized and information gathered. In short, guided by higher level student tutors and the teachers, they can try out what it means to pull together an STS analysis. This is totally experimental for them. they come with no knowledge at all about the field, so they have to figure out how they pull these different things together. So the four cases, we use have different qualities, but they all are very open to a multitude of STS questions. We look with them together at the disasters and the role of techno-scientific expertise, and study in concrete the case of the earthquake in L'Aquila in Italy. And that's quite interesting because it has a component where also law and science comes in, where these experts have been sentenced by the tribunal for manslaughter because they did not manage to communicate risks properly, etc. So this has many dimensions. The second is about controversies in the case of HPV vaccines that can show very nice national difference in handling such issues, sex and gender and sexuality topics, individual and collective choices, questions of trust and expertise, etc. Then we have the making of environmental futures, the case of geoengineering, and finally the question of scientific, the case of fraud and misconduct in research, and more broadly, how values are enacted in research practices or not, and how systems handle such transgressions. Now the question remains, what do we learn from battling over such cases? So that looks, they have all boards in the room where we teach them, where they keep their stuff, and kind of start to document and write down what they find and how they judge that. Now, what do we learn from these battles? They ask questions we have unlearned to ask, actually. Some questions we call non-STS questions, but they don't accept these classifications very easily. They have questions and they would like to find answers to them. And so kind of struggling over what is a good STS question and what is not is actually a key thing that is engaged here. This reminds us that we have to make it explicit why we would like to defend some positions and what is more open for consideration. It allows us to see through different eyes what makes a problem. We are pushed to make explicit some of our assumptions we simply take for granted. All this is essential to sharpen our awareness of the changing world expressed through the new generation's minds. Teaching STS through this case-based learning approach seems promising, as through these practical explorations, we train students to ask these questions, to try out things, to struggle, to muddle, to do whatever it needs to get closer. STS thus becomes much more than a core reading, a core set of readings, or to get to know the important authors in the field. It becomes a way of approaching and being in the world. This brings me to the second major challenge in doing and teaching STS, namely to develop a situated and sensitive way of practicing critique. A first semester student once remarked that STS seems to have developed a very sophisticated approach for taking things apart, pointing at the weaknesses, the hidden structures, the connections and the wrongs, but it seems less good in putting things back together, taking a more or less clear position, developing a normative stance. We all know this tension. It often pops up in our own discussion when we speak about practical arenas in which we engage like policymakers. Our answer that practicing critique should never mean solely to look at issues from a safe distance, using sophisticated epistemic tools to make scientifically sound claims. It always also means engaging with citizens, scientists, engineers, policymakers, and being ready for these disturbances and possibilities to question their own assumptions. Our motive is thinking and doing research. Then I would claim practicing STS becomes more an art in the early meaning of the term. That means a practical skill and a highly skilled practice, both at the same time. In that sense, I very much like Foucault's summary of critique. A critique is not a matter of saying that things are not right as they are. It's a matter of pointing out what kinds of assumptions, what kinds of familiar, unchallenged, unconsidered modes of thought, the practices that they accept the rest. Criticism is to show that things are not as self-evident as one believes, to see what is accepted as self-evident will no longer be accepted as such. Practicing critique is a matter of making facile gestures difficult. Following this way of understanding critique is, however, not easy, because we touched at the heart of these people and how they were trained. We touched at the questions that they believed deeply in when they came out of these disciplines. And so that is really an important issue. To close, I want to highlight and finish Gary's question of what can we learn from that. And I would say, indeed, the fact that every year a new cohort of students enters our classroom with new ambitions, new questions, and a new blend of expertise and new dreams is essential for making us as STS researchers. They do not only allow us to simply keep the business running. This is the richness, actually, and the keeping it alive. And to finish off with a small anecdote, after a defense I asked last year one of my students, so what will you do? And he smiled and he said, I will go into engineering. And he came out of business studies and had done STS, and I said, why into engineering? And he said, after this experience, I imagined I could make a difference, and it might matter to do things differently. Maybe that's why we should continue doing that work. Thank you.
From Taiwan, the editor of the East. In this presentation, I plan to use three cases to elaborate how SDS in Taiwan has involved in this activism. And the fourth case is about how the RCA lawsuit. I presented this case last year in Buenos Aires. Let me update it today. RCA, Radio Corporation of America, an electronic company, first moved to Taiwan in 1966 and shut down all its factories there in 1992. RCA left Taiwan, but its pollution did not. The former workers, mostly women, have long suspected that the high incidence of cancers and other illness was caused by toxic chemicals in the workplace or by polluted underwater. They decided to sue RCA for $80 million and for justice. This is the first ever case in Taiwan in which workers have collectively sued global companies. This is my latest update news. After the 5-year lawsuit, RCA workers win. The 4 letters in the middle, 终于胜诉, means finally we win. This was in November last year, and workers held a press conference in front of the court. In this press conference, SDS scholar Lin Yiping gave a brief presentation on how academics in Taiwan has worked with the RCA case. SDS community has made important efforts. I would say that they exemplify 3 kinds of interactional expertise. They first work with the activists to assist the RCA workers in collecting health data to better prepare for the lawsuit. They conducted Taiwan's first large-scale epidemiological study. Secondly, they challenged the gender bias of the early epidemiological findings and inspired local scientists to produce better research. Lin Yiping argued that the social and biological aspects of female workers in the third world needed to be taken into account. This inspired the epidemiologists to change their assembly methods to include women under 20 who had worked less than 3 months into the samples. This included led to the statistically significant finding that female workers exposed to such toxic chemicals had a higher incidence of breast cancer. Lin's paper titled Women and Water was about how women's use of water has been underestimated by the mainstream epidemiology. One artist even made Lin's influential paper into an exhibition. Thirdly, SDS scholars work with the lawyers to interpret the scientific evidence. They told them the politics of reading scientific findings and discussed the limitations of science when it came to proving causal relationship. Overall, engaging with such complicated case demands respect for the strict science and a interpretation of the academic science and the production of new science. These devoted SDS scholars published this special issue of essay on Taiwanese Journal for Studies of SDM. We have strong evidence that the defending lawyers have studied this special issue very carefully. And East Asian communities have learned from each other for court cases. ASEAN's workers' lawyers have used Japan's famous environmental lawsuits of Minamata disease and Idaida disease to make points. Korean scholars have worked on the Samsung workers' leukemia case and compared that with the ASEAN case. We can expect more collaboration and comparisons in East Asia on the court. The community case is about anti-nuclear power movement in Taiwan. This is a no-nuke movement in Japan after Fukushima. This is one of many Fukushima effects in Taiwan. Taiwan has 3 nuclear power plants. The 4th one was under construction when Fukushima disaster happened. Fukushima disaster gave new momentum for activists in Taiwan to fight against not only nuclear power plants number 4, but also number 1, 2, 3. Green Citizen Action Alliance is the leading anti-nuke organization in Taiwan. And one of their agenda in recent years is to deepen the discussion in the community and try to attract new supporters. Several SDS members in Taiwan, including me, have worked with them for this public forum. We quickly figured out that when we have to discuss the nuclear power issues with housewives, high school students, and Rotary Club members, we cannot rely on Brian silence of them or Charles Perrault's noble accents as we usually do in the classroom. We then have to develop the following strategies to make better discussion. Taiwanize the nuclear power risk, bring in the public culture, and learn more from the Japanese and Korean making and doing. Fukushima disaster has created some new risk framework for Taiwan. This map is what we often presented to our audience. Please guess, what are the black dots? Nuclear power plants, you are very good. And the red dots, the site of big earthquake. Great. And where are the places the black overlap with the red? Yes, Japan, Taiwan, and California. So this is a new dimension of vulnerability we seldom thought of before in Taiwan. And the second is about population density. The emigration of Fukushima residents reminds us the factor of population density. According to the journal Nature, there are 3 most scary nuclear power plants, which are located very closely with the mega cities. 2 of them are in Taiwan. Taiwan's nuclear power plants number 1 and number 2 have 5 million Taipei residents within a 30-kilometer radius. So we introduced an app to calculate how far your nuclear neighbors live from your place. I will demonstrate to them that my office is 22.4 kilometers from the nuclear power number 2. And we also feel this would be helpful to bring in the public culture for public discussion. Taiwanese are big fans of Japanese cultures. This is the typical cotton map for tourists. So we would like to change this map to this map of nuclear power distribution. We'll also use Atom, the atomic boy, the peace-solving robot, for our public discussion. This animation has been shown in Taiwan, and actually one of my favorites. Only after the Fukushima disaster, fans like me started to know that it was sponsored by the nuclear power company since 1960s to make something nuclear more friendly or even heroic. The atomic boy's sister is called uranium, meaning uranium. So bring public culture this way often interested younger generation. And the source of Taiwanize or Asianize the nuclear power control. The framework came from the East Asian SDS scholarly work, including Teach 311 by Young East Asian SDS generation, our journalist, film and documentary like Software Mia's Nuclear Java. And NGO tends to learn from NGOs, and we academics would like to learn from other academics. Therefore, we benefit greatly from our Japanese and Korean making and doing. For example, Japanese mothers use radiation detector to collect possible contamination. This case has become a very important inspiration for activists in Taiwan to do citizen science. And Mother's movement to draw radiation map was introduced to Taiwan. This slide was made by Mrs. Shima Nozomi from Japan. She made a map of the organized mothers who had the radiation contamination of her daughter's elementary school, and I learned very much from her action and research. And South Korea has become a very important inspiration for green energy in Taiwan too. Seoul's city energy planning, one last nuclear power plant, has much involved with some South Korean SDS scholars, including the leading scholar Yoon Sang-jong, who was invited by the Green Alliance to introduce the model and gain a lot of media attention and some policy reform. So our need to better engage with local people pushes us to learn more from our East Asian SDS colleagues. Finally, the street case is about a Taiwanese innovation of deliberative democracy during the Sunflower Movement last year. The Sunflower Movement is a protest movement driven by students and civic groups. They occupied the Parliament chamber last March for 3 weeks to protest the passing of the post-trade service trade agreement between Taiwan and China by the ruling party, Kuomintang, at the legislature without clear review. And the movement gave a lot of support from the general public. This is the big demonstration 3 days before the end of occupation. From the beginning of the occupation, many people came to the roads along the parliament to show their support and concern. They often stayed there for long hours. So some NGOs and academics started to offer open-air talk to the supporters. We feel that it is only one-way discussion. So a group of SDS people and NGO members started the D Street activity. D means democracy and liberation. Democratization of science and technology has been an important SDS effort in Taiwan. Taiwan SDS community has introduced and revised the codes for a consensus conference from Denmark, deliberative polling from the US, science welfare origination in the UK, and deliberative budgeting from Brazil. The very first special issue of the list is about the comparative deliberative democracy in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And this week was a very challenging experiment for us. After 10 years of practicing various deliberative methods, we have to every step outdoor and in 3 hours. Like many participatory methods, we first offered lectures on the chosen subjects and prepared reading sheets for those who occupy the streets. And our facilitators would make space and invite the street people to join their group for discussion. We usually had 15 to 20 facilitators for each session, and each one would take a group of 10 to 20 people. So, and these are the many steps during the 3-hour deliberation. And this is the presentation for each group. And we take notes and make the group conclusion into a session conclusion. I was taking the notes on the right side, you see me. And this is our session conclusion in the street. And we have made 15 session conclusion like this for the 10 days. So this is a labor-intensive work with a lot of strong will. And in the end, I think this street reached at least 4,000 to 6,000 persons. And before the students ended the occupation, we had the D Street inside the Parliament chamber and in the street at the same time. The topic is about what kind of democratic procedure we need for the Taiwan-China trade deal. The conclusion became one of the final appeal for the Sunflower Movement. So our engagement with citizens in the court, in the community, and in the streets all have delivered challenges to us as people. How to do science for justice, how to localize discourse to communicate with diverse groups, and how to design and capture fast-tempo deliberative procedures for protesters with shared values to discuss issues with difficult technical contents. We need more reflection on these issues, but time is up, so I want to conclude that making public engagement of this type of making a doing makes SDS really exciting. And thank you much for your patience. And please follow us East for some of our East Asian doing. Thank you.
Good evening for us. It is good to be with you, even if at a distance. I'll speak to you tonight about initiatives I've come to call STS Plus, in which STS thought styles are shared with people working in other domains, cultivating their capacity to think and act with STS sensibilities as they build and practice other modes of knowledge. The goal is what we have come to think of as kaleidoscopic perspective. Explanatory pluralism is animated and invested in as such. Critiques of reductionism are, of course, long-standing, expressed particularly well in feminist and post-colonial theory, attuned to lived effects. Reductionism hurts, but practicing otherwise remains a challenge for a number of reasons. Reductionism can't be displaced by a singular something else, and things pluralized are always more complicated. Thinking and practicing otherwise is also rule-resistant and thus often tacit rather than overt, yet can't be thought of as coming naturally, as unstructured. The trick we have learned is in like structure that shapes without over-determining. This, we have learned, has to be purposeful and has compelled us to ask questions seemingly straightforward, but certainly not. What are STS thought styles? What do they look like in practice? How can we support them conceptually and technically? And what follows, I'll share how we work through these questions. First, though, let me briefly situate myself. I come to this work from over 2 decades at RPI, where many of my students and colleagues are engineers. I also study engineers and other experts, the systems they build, and how they fail. Disasters, fast and slow. And always long. Fast, like the Bhopal and Fukushima disasters, slow, like air pollution and chronic asthma, all extending over time, demanding different kinds of response. But recognizing that disaster, critically defined, is always a failure of thought as well as a failure of technology and operations. Focus on disaster, fast and slow, has made me ever mindful of the limits and failures of expertise and of a critical need for it. We have to invest in experts while rethinking what expertise is. This is the effort I describe here. We've worked in a number of arenas. I'll briefly describe 4. For at least a decade, I've taught first-year university students in a course titled Environment and Politics. Many STS colleagues have worked along with me, including Dean Newsma, Nick Woodhouse, Brenda Castello-Kuhn, Pedro de la Torre, Sonia Saheb, Guy Schaefer, Scott Kellogg, Laura Ravenel, Leo Beishinger, and Lee Nelson. This year, I've been joined by 2 colleagues from engineering, Professor Chip Kilduff in environmental and Professor Amir Hirsa in aeronautical, and by Professor Peter Persans in physics. 2 of the teaching assistants for the course are also from engineering, Fayez Rashid and Vignesh Balaraj. We're now trying to lace engineering perspectives into the array of light structures supporting STS modes of thought. It really is taking a village. I use these images to remind the students and the teaching group of the reality and value of different thought styles and explanatory pluralism. And we've used different types of scaffolding, structure to help our students read, listen, and observe with STS sensibilities. They learn to map stakeholders, for example, and the power plays they operate within. They also do role plays, learning to argue in a way illustrative of diverse stakeholder positions and ideological frameworks, playing roles in debates over energy alternatives, for example, or in interactive games involving arrays of stakeholders. Leo Bashimer developed this one just this week, drawing his students into complex negotiations over energy and water on Navajo land in the American West. Another arena for the development of STS Plus has been through a program that I've called Eco-Ed, in which university students in different fields develop and deliver curriculum to younger students, first grade through high school. Here, my RPI students themselves develop scaffolding and structure to cultivate STS thought styles in younger students, some as young as 7 years old. In so doing, my RPI students themselves come to embody Eco-Ed's literacy goals, laced with STS insight. Another arena for the development of STS Plus has been in work responsive to industrial and environmental disaster. Throughout my career, I've tried to leave my undergraduate students with an imagination for disaster, showing them documentary films and photos, taking them through the gritty, blow-by-blow, very human, power-charged ways disaster plays out. They are almost inevitably sobered and humbled. I want them to go away more careful and considerate engineers, thinking through disaster in whatever field they are in. In recent years, I've had the opportunity to share this teaching in a number of new venues, including Japan, at the invitation of physician and historian of medicine Rethi Chen, then director of the Division of Human Health at the International Atomic Energy Agency. Chen, partnering with STS scholar Greg Clancy, has played a lead role in an initiative to bring STS into the curriculum of Fukushima Medical University in the wake of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. I'm in Nagasaki now, working further in this vein. The goal, as I understand it, is to work together through different disaster cases, producing a kind of disaster literacy that improves capacity to read disaster. The great Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, author of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, used the verb read in this way, encouraging the development of capacity to read the historical conditions in which one lives, noting how structural conditions produce injury, often with social pattern, pointing to possibilities for redressive collective action. It is this kind of reading of disaster that we are after with STS+. We are working to build a disaster STS research network to continue and expand this work. Please join us. Which leads to yet another arena for working on STS+. I've been involved for many years in effort to develop cyber infrastructure to support ethnographic STS research. We call the core platform PEACE, the Platform for Experimental Collaborative Ethnography. The Disaster STS Network will soon run on PEACE, allowing us to build and experiment with an international research network informed by STS insight on the ways knowledge is produced, circulates, is legitimated, and has political charge. Working this out has also taken a village, including people working on both the cyber side and on the content or domain side. STS researchers Mike Fortune, Lindsay Poirier, Brandon Costello-Kuhn, Louis-Philippe Murillo, Brian Callahan, Pedro de la Torre, and Sharon Trawick have played lead roles in the cyber design work. The Disaster STS Network is moving forward with an even more distributed group. Scott Knowles and Scott Frickle, Vivian Choi, Pedro de la Torre, Mike Philippe, Jen Henderson, and Alan Morgan have all been critical animators. We're still figuring out what the PEACE platform to the Disaster STS will look like, but it is already clear that STS Plus will go in yet another direction here. And we've imagined still other instances of PEACE. PEACE is designed to support collaborative hermeneutics, critical questioning of multiple ways of thinking about matters at hand, what can be called an STS thought style. Ethnographically, we know that such questioning is critical not only to the practice and careers of professional scholars. People in many, if not all, domains of practice could leverage the kind of critical questioning that PEACE and STS supports. So we need to figure out how to share it. Alan Morgan has thus been conceptualizing a PEACE for patients with chronic illness, for example, Inspired by the recent success of our Taiwanese STS colleagues in a toxic lawsuit, I began thinking about a peaceful pushback by contaminated communities. I'll close now with a few of the figurative images that I've used to think about what STS is in practice, images that help to render and express STS thought styles so that they are shareable without nailing them down in a way inevitably subject to ossification. This one is a favorite. This image of sedimented shale rock, suggesting and calling for thinking across scale with finer granularity than conventional social science method acknowledges. This to be ever ready for commercial determinations of what counts as knowledge, as problems, and as possible. And this figure of the wise man who with just a turn of the head becomes a liar, pointing to the way expertise, by its very nature, can deceive. And to end, I'll return to the image of the kaleidoscope, recalling that the ends and beginning of STS Plus is kaleidoscopic perspective. Also, however, using the image of the kaleidoscope to imagine what it would look like for the global STS community to be better connected in our efforts to put STS into practice in different ways is illustrated in this plenary and in the grand making and doing showcase on Thursday. We have a lot to learn from each other. We should coordinate and leverage our differences and shared investment in STS. The world needs us in these late industrial times. This is very clear to me. We live in a world of remarkable complexity with nested and tangled systems of many kinds, some aging and corroded, some emergent and barely tested, all riven by an angry earth, fueled by what is now called the energy industry, just a few years ago, the oil industry. That's how things are cleaned up these days. Words matter, very literally. The earth and built infrastructure also speak. STS can help make sense of how it all goes together. So we need to be at the table, putting STS in practice in many ways, enlivening our collectivity. I thank Gary Downey for kickstarting the work, drawing us together across national lines, turning different takes on STS into a community resource. I look forward to the work ahead. Thank you, have a good evening, and a great conference.
Quería agradecer la invitación que hizo Carita para esto, para hacerlo. No sé si lo voy a hacer tanto aquí porque me obliga a hacer un desafío que no sé si estoy dispuesto en este momento de mi vida, que es intentar sistematizar qué es lo que estamos haciendo en el campo CTS en América Latina y para en Argentina los investigadores. Y para toda una relación con diferentes públicos.
really sorry I can't be with you in Denver tonight or the rest of this weekend. But I want to thank Gary for inviting me to participate in this panel and for offering me the chance to record these thoughts for you. And I thank my fellow panelists as well for indulging me in making these comments without them having the chance to challenge me directly. The main idea I'd like to convey is that I think being an STS practitioner is a state of mind. It's an identity. And it's a state of mind that students, especially undergraduate students, need to be led to. That's because for many students, certainly through secondary school and often into their university years, science is a fairly clear track. You're good at science and math, you keep on doing it. The world needs more and better scientists and engineers, they're told. And if you're a woman or a person of color and you're good in those technical fields, the pressure to continue in them is even greater. I know this is the situation in the US, but I imagine this happens in other countries too, that channeling students who are good in science and engineering into continuing their technical education is an even more powerful urge in the UK or in other countries where the educational systems divide people between the humanities and the sciences quite early. But STS practitioners are precisely those who see the middle ground among these different disciplines. They often like science, but they don't want to be scientists. They find the policy issues or the historical background or the daily practices of scientists or the institutional forces or the philosophical implications or the intersection of all of these as being equally important, no more important than the science and technology itself. But if you've been trained all through secondary school and even at the beginning of your university career to be a scientist or an engineer, you feel a little bit odd admitting that you don't want to be a technical person. Your friends are working hard in the lab and they expect you to do that too. You feel like maybe you're abandoning all the hopes and efforts that your parents and your teachers and your mentors have put into you to helping you achieve this really important thing called science and technology. So you're quiet about your discomfort with science. You think maybe it's just a passing phase. Maybe you don't even want to admit to yourself that you have these other interests. And this is where I think STS courses come in. Because maybe you get a chance to take such a course. It fulfills a requirement for a humanities option for science and engineering students. Or maybe you just happen to drop in on it as you're fulfilling an elective. Suddenly you discover that there are other students like you, fellow students who like to inquire about science and technology policy, fellow students who like to write about science and technology for the general public, fellow students who ask questions about the history, philosophy, and daily practice of science and technology. There's a shock of recognition. There's a moment of identity. These people are like me. They think the way I do. They ask the same questions that I do. I want to be with these people for the rest of my life. Maybe just the rest of my profession. All of this is a reflection of the very first line in the challenge that Gary gave to us. What forms of knowledge, expertise, identities, and commitments does one gain through an undergraduate degree in STS? I think that identity is a key. It's what we need to give STS practitioners as we form it. It's an identity as someone who's not a scientist or an engineer or a doctor, but who's not abandoning technical science either. It's an identity as someone who has contributed to a better integration of science and society by seeking a different path. And it's okay to seek that path. You recognize that you're not alone, that other people are seeking that path too. I think that is how we form STS practitioners. So how does this play out in practice? Let me talk about the S&TS program at Cornell as an example. Cornell's Department of Science and Technology Studies offers 2 undergraduate majors, Biology and Society and Science and Technology Studies. They come from different traditions in science studies and thus have different goals. Comparing them may be useful. Biology and Society was created more than 40 years ago by practicing scientists with concerns about science, technology, and society. Most of the students are pre-meds or preparing for careers in biotechnology and pharmaceutical marketing, or scientific researchers, or some other science-related field. The goal is to give them both a strong science background and the tools to see how social issues intersect with science. Although the core courses with titles like Life Sciences and Society, Ethical Issues in Medicine and Healthcare, and Environmental Ethics are taught by faculty from the Department of Science and Technology Studies, most of the courses are taught by people from other departments and other disciplines, and many students fulfill their breadth and depth requirements for natural science courses. Thus, although there is a clear pedagogical coherence across the major, the intellectual assumptions of many of the individual courses may vary. We hope that students understand the fundamental and social nature of science, but it doesn't surprise us if they still hold to traditional understandings of science and technology. They may not have fully identified as S&TS practitioners. The Science and Technology Studies major was created about 25 years ago at the time that the S&TS department at Cornell was created. It was designed by those of us for whom S&TS is at the core of what we do. The major targets are students who are already asking questions about the nature of the relationship between science, technology, society, social issues, and social theory. Although it superficially has a structure similar to biology and society with strong science and technology requirements, core courses, and then breadth and depth requirements, the courses that students use for those breadth and depth requirements are much more likely to be in the S&TS department or in closely allied departments like history, anthropology, philosophy, communication, or development sociology. For this major, we expect students to emerge with a deep understanding of the interweaving of science, technology, class, gender, locale, communication, etc. We expect these students to approach all their interactions with an STS perspective. These are the students who we think will identify as STS practitioners. The biology and society major is roughly 20 times the size of the STS major. That's the reality of where the market is. Mostly smart science students who know that there's more to science than especially medicine and technical knowledge, but are fundamentally interested in careers that draw on their technical knowledge. So the challenge for us is to move those biology and societies majors more towards the S&TS majors, to give them stronger identities as STS practitioners. We want them to identify with STS at least as much as with their medical or engineering or research lab colleagues. We want them to see that really important STS concepts like theory-laden observation, or tacit knowledge, or the scientific revolution are tools that can help them practice their careers more successfully. As students take on this kind of STS identity, we also need to help them understand how to make the transition from their old identity. For example, my colleague Rebecca Slayton, who's teaching one of our gateway courses called What is Science, told me that she wants students to understand both the limitations of climate science because of things like theory-laden observation or the fragmentation of knowledge, and the reasons for nonetheless accepting the consensus of the scientific community that the Earth is warming and it's due to human activity. Helping students really think about how to really understand how to think critically about the social basis of science and technology without turning them into apathetic relativists is a central challenge, Rebecca said, for her teaching and indeed for all of us. For many of us on the faculty, we really hope that undergraduate students will make the STS perspective the core of their identity. Certainly some of our students who have gone on to graduate programs in STS and allied fields have that identity. Some of you may even be in the audience tonight there at STS, at 4S, and I'm really glad to see that you're there. But so do some of the people who've taken up science communication or medical ethics or technology regulation. They've taken up an STS identity. Even if our students do end up going into traditional medical careers or commercial law or engineering management, we hope that some part of them remains identified as STS practitioners. So the question that I want to leave for the panel is, do we accept that the formation of STS practitioners through undergraduate education means that most of them will only be attuned to STS ideas as they remain in their scientific and technical occupations? Or do we strive to convert more of them into practitioners with a full STS identity, those whose actions in the world are governed by STS concepts? Again, I thank you for your time, and my apologies that I'm not able to join you for the rest of the conversation. I hope you have a good rest of the evening and rest of the meeting. Goodbye.
Yes.
Okay. For people who became sleepy during watching videos, I hope that my presentation keeps you alive. My name is Yuko Fujigaki. I'm working at the University of Tokyo, and I'll talk on the science communication program for graduate students and developments for specialist education for undergraduates. As Ulrike Felt pointed out, one of the biggest challenges in doing and teaching STS is to develop situated and sensitive way of practicing critiques. In the University of Tokyo, we have tried to overcome this challenge in science communication program for master's level since 2005. I will introduce the curriculum of this course and will describe how graduates from this program perform as STS practitioners. The Science Communication Program for Master's level was established in 2005 by Science Promotion Program of NEXT, Ministry of Education, Science, Technology, Culture and Sports. The budget had expired in 2010, and after that, this program was continued by the university's budget. This slide explains the members of faculties of this program. As you see, there are 8 scientists and 9 STS researchers, including researchers in history and philosophy of science. Therefore, we are conducting this program in collaboration between scientists and STS researchers. This slide explains the curriculum of this program. Classes are divided into 2 categories: contents education and expression education. Contents includes what should science communicator convey to public. On the contrary, expression includes how should science communication convey information to public. In the contents category, we have some classes to teach basic theories in STS. These are photos of classes, lectures in class, visiting sites, practicing interviews, and conducting science cafe. This slide shows the background of students of this program: Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, Graduate School of Science, Graduate School of Medicine, Graduate School of Humanities and Sociology, Graduate School of Engineering, Agriculture, Life Sciences, Public Policy, Information Science, and Mathematics, and so on. Okay, how do graduates from this program perform as STS practitioners? This chart shows the distribution of their jobs after graduation of this program. 15 students selected academic career in universities and research institutes. 17 students go on to doctor's course of each graduate school, 10 for private companies, 9 for mass media, 8 for public sectors, including Ministry of Education, and 3 for education. It includes publishers making science education book. There's also a student who got a job in science museum, and there is a student who is working as a lawyer. This slide shows the voices from graduates. For example, Mr. N, working at Japan Science Technology Agency, said that he is acting as an STS practitioner in funding agency. And Mrs. K, who is working as healthcare professional, said that she learned the way to bridge voices of patients and that of health professionals. And Mr. F, working as lawyer, said that he is bridging science world and law world. And Mrs. O, who is working at Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, said that in policy making there are lots of tasks to bridge science and society. Okay, in these 10 years, 103 students engaged in this program and 67 students graduated from this program. And the success of this program provided grounding and legitimacy for liberal arts for specialist education for undergraduates from 2015. In Japan, there was a nuclear power plant accident in Fukushima in 2011. This is a book I edited on Fukushima, and this book is published by Springer this year. In the reflection of Fukushima nuclear power plant's accidents, there are strong needs to deal with segregation between fields of research. For example, the level of research in nuclear technology and simulation technology, as well as the level of research regarding tsunami and earthquake in Japan, were not known. However, these researches and this technology were not integrated for risk prevention. There was a little effort to bridge the gap between field and between what scientists provide and what public needs. Therefore, one of the reasons of establishment of liberal arts program for specialists is to bridge these gaps. STS can provide theoretical grants for bridging gaps by examining the premise of discipline, theories, and technologies. Liberal arts education for specialists is education which makes specialists get out of one-dimensional man. In this education, students should consider deeply in these three aspects. Number one, what is the social context of your own research? Number two, how can you communicate with those outside of your community? Number three, how can you collaborate with those from other disciplines? By deep consideration of these three questions, students learn cross-boundary communication. This is education which makes specialists get out of one-dimensional man. In this liberal arts education for professionals, students are required to bring up ability to pass boundaries back and forth. It is an ability to think beyond the boundaries of field, boundaries of faculty, for example. As you see in this figure, students from Faculty of Science attend some classes in Faculty of Humanities in this education. When people encounter the different people from different communities, then they notice the boundaries of communities and rethink further about ability to pass boundaries back and forth. This slide shows the purpose of liberal arts. The purpose of liberal arts education is to open the mind. This means that the purpose of liberal arts education for specialists is to notice the boundaries of one's own discipline and to release oneself from restriction of these boundaries and to open the mind to people from other disciplines using other languages. This slide summarizes the role of STS in liberal arts education for specialists, which enhance the cross-boundary communication. STS is effective in liberal arts education for specialists, since STS has a methodology to reconstruct established boundaries and classification. It has a tendency to ask how things are taken for granted got to be that way. This tendency is to open the mind itself. Therefore, for opening the mind, STS also can provide theoretical grounds since STS has a sort of theories to ask premises. Asking premise in STS theories open the way to relativize framework of plural sites. For example, in several meetings concerning Fukushima, value-related had different meanings among different communities. In Pagosh conference held in Nagasaki last week, uncertainty had different meanings among different communities. To analyze these differences, asking premise in STS theories is very effective. So, relativizing framework in STS theories open the way to breach the plural sites, think beyond the boundaries of fields, boundaries of faculty, back and forth. Therefore, STS can provide theoretical grounds for bridging gaps by examining the premise of discipline, theories, and technologies. Thank you.
Please hang with us tomorrow.
I'm Noortje Mares from the Center for Interdisciplinary Methodologies at the University of Warwick. And I too want to start by thanking Gary for the invitation to speak about issues that we face. Great brief. And the particular, raise it up a bit. The particular issues that I would like to discuss arise from the following circumstance. When we adopt practice-based approaches in teaching science and technology studies, we are likely to teach STS in close relation to other practices. And this is a challenge that some of the other speakers also touched on, I think. But I face this challenge in teaching a MA course called Digital Sociology, which is a collaborative practice-based program that I convened at Goldsmiths, the University of London, across two departments, the Department of Computing and the Department of Sociology. And I now teach this course at the University of Warwick, together with a Spanish STS researcher and architect called Neria Calvillo. Now, this master's course has a particular aim, namely to connect the doing of social studies with the making of stuff, digital stuff, developing an app, a site, a tool, or even a service. And here you see an example of a digital sociology graduate, Sam Martin, who worked on living with celiac disease. Now, it means that insofar as we teach STS as part of digital sociology, and I will come to how we do that, we do so explicitly in relation to creative and technical practices, those of digital publishing, software development, and design. And this makes, for me, particularly urgent and challenging this question of how do we establish the relevance of STS to these kinds of practices. Now, in some respects, adopting practice-based formats for teaching certainly makes it easier to communicate STS insights, as practices generate multiple opportunities to do this. But it also comes with risks. In one course called Digital Sociology in Practice, we have an aim which I think is quite STS, namely we seek to teach students how to engage with sociology in the making rather than with digital sociology as a finalized body of knowledge. Now, in providing that framework, students then undertake practical group projects in which they use and develop digital techniques like phone apps, smartphone apps, to investigate current issues like air quality. Now, taking such an approach, inviting students to develop projects and take this as an occasion to learn about technology in the making and research in the making, to me and to some of my colleagues, is a very STS-y approach to take. But it is not necessarily obvious to the students taking the course. Certainly they like this course and other parts of digital sociology. They, I think what is especially helpful or likable is that they can engage in doing research themselves, drawing on everyday experience, talking about contemporary technology, as well as science and technology studies. And I think those combinations make it very approachable. But this also raises a very tricky question, namely the question of how indispensable STS is to this kind of practice-based approach to teaching social studies. And it's a question I like to take seriously. I mean, to be clear, in my view, STS is completely indispensable to teaching digital sociology. But the point is that this is not self-evident. As an STS tactic, a focus on practice is meant, I think, to enable a more holistic approach to digital social studies. It means to offer an antidote against the dryness of some more formal approaches, to make things more lively. But adopting practice-based formats does not necessarily ensure these things. In the context of digital research, the context here, it can easily be misperceived as an invitation to concentrate on technical skill acquisition, like developing apps. Practice, then, is not innocent. It is full of risks. Now, of course, we in STS have known this for a very long time. But the point takes on fresh relevance, I think, when we adopt practice-based approaches to teaching STS and doing STS. I think this makes it clear that when we change register to practices of making and doing, this in itself is not a solution to anything. To paraphrase Ludwig Wittgenstein, many, if not most, of the problems of the politics of knowledge and the politics of technology are still there, even once we have reframed STS as a practice, explicitly framed it as a practice-based approach. So, what then do creative and technical practices have to offer in terms of enabling ecologies and formations of STS? Making and doing may not solve anything as such, but they do produce situations in which we can encounter problems afresh. And this is the part I want to insist on. Practices of making and doing offer us more and more intimate occasions for engaging with issues that are already core concerns of STS. And this is important to recognize, I think, especially in relation to digital practices. So this includes the problem of the authority of experts, the problem that technical expertise is valued over other modes of knowing and doing in our societies. So I should look at Gary and his clock. How are we doing? Okay, well that sounds good. Okay. That's good that you're not counting. That's great. So to say this one more time, the problem I think the problems of STS are not solved by shifting register and to adopt making and doing as our formats. But it does allow us to encounter the problems of STS and the problems with which STS engages in a different form. The problem, for instance, of the authority of experts and expert knowledge now appears as the challenge of how we can practically develop ways for knowledge to circulate in a different way across social life. And the question that when we develop research techniques collaboratively, whether we can do this in another mode than one that pitches experts against non-experts. So the questions, at least, I think, are good of practice-based approaches. And to clarify this point, I wanted to show you this picture of an esteemed colleague of mine, Bernard Lieder, who some of you here may know. And more particularly, I wanted to show you his frown, which appeared on his forehead during a development workshop where we discussed a prototype digital research tool which is still under development, called the Issue Profiler. This tool seeks to combine STS methods with other methods deriving from social metrics, in which Bernard is more of an expert. Now, Bernard's frown can be taken to mean many things, but it also reminds me of how difficult it is to work across different ways of knowing. This is a problem, and I think we in STS are good at treating problems as problems. So I wanted to insist on that. But the final point about ecologies of doing STS. I am told quite often that institutions do matter. And of course institutions matter. Who would doubt this? But if practice-based approaches to STS are to succeed in their aim, and I take this aim to be that of making STS relevant to a wider range of professional trajectories, if we are to succeed in this, then we need to cultivate more than institutional settings. What is STS? It is many things, but other speakers have also, I think, mentioned already that it is very much a sensibility, one that enables us to grasp and interpret a very broad range of moments and also problematic situations. Take this last example that I was already showing you. A project called Spiral Drawing Sunrise, which is a digital art project on which I collaborated with a Dutch artist called Esther Colau. This project consists of a small solar-powered robot cart that makes drawings out of sand, powered by the rising sun. Now, you see Esther adjusting the device, and it's a device that she and I agreed to describe as a tool for tracing movements of the Earth. Now, we concluded that this formulation captures well the point of drawing sunrises. It is a way of making digital representation less abstract, of showing how measurement is always specific to a setting. Now, this kind of a point is, of course, very STS. But I think that this example also highlights something else. That it is ultimately in the practices of everyday life and in material and technical practices in everyday settings that the situations come about that allow us to show the wider relevance of STS. So if we are to teach STS in practice-based formats, then we need institutional arrangements that allow us to connect with these kind of moments and to connect STS with these kind of settings.
No PowerPoint. something completely different. Right. Yeah. Just back up. Maybe somebody else's power. I think we're going to do this. No. I'm John Walensky. I've never quite been in a session like this before. I will use the mic. It's been quite amazing, and I've been sitting at the front, and I'm stunned coming up here now, looking back to see if there's anybody sitting behind me. You've been very patient. It's been an amazing kind of experience in terms of where we've gone and what we've seen. And I wanted to talk a bit about the program I've been in, but I need to start a bit too in terms of the disruption and the spirit of the disruptions we've been through. And that is to say, when Gary first approached me about doing this session, my first thought was, practitioners? What are we talking about with practitioners? I work in an undergraduate, strictly undergraduate STS program. This is at Stanford University. It's a 44-year-old program that has never moved beyond undergraduate. There are 250 to 300 students in the program in any given year over the last 2 or 3 years. And I would be stunned if any of them thought of themselves as STS practitioners. I'm trained as a school teacher, so I do think I am a practitioner. I was trained to be a teacher. I went into the classroom. I did it badly, but I was practicing every day. If I'd gotten it right, I wouldn't have been a practitioner. Perhaps I would have been a professional. But this very idea that a practitioner is a professional. Sorry, I'm too loud. Apologies. I've been waiting, please. It's bursting out. Are we better? Yes, I'll bring it down. This idea then of the practitioner and the professionalism of STS is a concern to me. My predecessor at Stanford in the STS, directing the STS program, I direct the STS program, Fred Turner, talked about it as the liberal arts of the 21st century. And no one who studied the liberal arts ever thought of themselves as a practitioner of the liberal arts. It was a sensibility. It was a way of looking at the world, but it wasn't something that you professionalized or practiced in that way. After I raised my original objections to Gary's points, and he wrote back very politely that he would file it away and keep it in mind, and then went ahead in the spirit he did. I too became somewhat convinced. There's something about being assigned a task. Your first response is resistance, your second is compliance. And so I did comply to a certain degree, although I'm still wondering about the practitioners Foucault and Wittgenstein, and how they might have responded to that notion of themselves as practitioners. But we do practice, we do make, and we do in the STS program. And I want to give you 3 examples before you cash in your drink ticket. Many of you are fingering even as I look out at the audience anxiously. Don't take the numbers off. 3 examples of what we do practice in the STS program, what we do make, and what we do. Kyoko Sato is the associate director of my program. She's presenting in another day or so. We don't overlap, so there's no danger to the program in case something happens in Denver. Kyoko is teaching this year a course that has a community engagement component. She's teaching on the politics of food, food security, food concerns around the drought in California, and generally the whole sensibility around the ethics of food. And she has her students working in San Jose at Sacred Heart, a program that is providing food support to the Latino community. And these students are dealing with Latour in the daytime. This is almost like Marx, it occurs to me now. And at night they go work in the home gardens of the Latino community. Or was it fishing with Marx? I forget. Did you do theory in the morning? Or I think it was the other way around. And the point for her is a very critical one, that in the sense that they do not bring their knowledge from their class to the gardens of San Jose, but that they open themselves to the knowledge that is being circulated in those gardens. That they open themselves to the food politics that people are living, and not talking about in the same language, but in fact are talking. In fact, she talks about the non-verbal food politics going on in these communities, around the security of the gardens, around the contrast between what the gardens are growing and what the corner stores are offering. And so this idea that these students are somehow practicing STS, I'm willing to accept to a certain degree, but that they are opening themselves to this broader experience, that they are seeing the exchange of knowledge between the university and the community and the gardens is to me the more promising aspect. A second example. This is from Cheryl Holzmeyer, who taught a course on environmental justice. Her project for the class was to change Wikipedia, was to introduce more of environmental justice into Wikipedia. She had her students edit and add articles and edit entries in Wikipedia. Three examples. In California, there was already a major entry on climate change affecting California, not surprisingly. And the student had to work his way into that entry to find a place where he could take a stand. And he was able to do that on the consequences of climate change in California on a kind of updated basis. We're in year 4 or 5 of the drought. And he was able to do that in a way that blended into the other commentaries that had been contributed, and in a way in which he had to defend in the talk section of the Wikipedia pages. And we know the seriousness of this, of having to enter into these conversations, of having to create a space for STS in these public sites of knowledge, because one student had his entire entry deleted by an editor. And this kind of hard-nosed reality in terms of the play of knowledge was a terrific experience. The third example from this one is in South Korea. The entry on South Korea had no mention of environment or anything close to environmental justice. And the student had to introduce a whole new section on this. And the idea of undergraduate students being able to change the face of public knowledge on a topic like Korea, or to supplement the knowledge that's being created around California, to me, is an example of making and doing. Whether it's a professional practice or not, we'll leave it aside. Let me give you a third example. And I want you to know this is my final set of examples, just in terms of your speed, my speed, and your time. This is a journal that we publish called Intersect. We have an undergraduate journal of Science and Technology, Science and Technology and Society. And this journal has been the bane of the program in one way. It's a peer-reviewed journal. But I've been working with it for 4 years. And in the 4 years, we've never once had an STS major edit the journal. We have 10 editors this year participating in the journal. And those 10 editors, actually, I have to be fair, one said she was seriously considering STS. And I said, if you edit the STS journal, you're highly qualified. But the other 9 had no doubts about it. But the idea that STS can be part of the undergraduate experience outside of the major, that STS could provide a way, the journal at least, could provide a way for those interested in this field, not ready to practice it, not ready to declare it as a major, but wanting to see their majors, whether they be mechanical engineering, medicine, biology, the humanities, English, one of them is part of it. And I want to share with you some of the articles that we receive. The journal is open to the world, receives articles from outside of Stanford, but largely from Stanford students. The students are engaged in peer review. It's very amusing to sit with them when they do their editorial meetings. Some of you have had these experiences with thumbs up and thumbs down, concessions that are made, offers to rewrite passages, questions about whether it's form or substance, whether an author has violated one of the ethical principles by submitting their article to a law review at the same time they submit it to their journal. It's academia in miniature. The articles, gramophones in Egypt, the influence on music in Egypt with the introduction of the gramophone. It's one of the articles recently published. The role of online slavery, the sense of workforce, conscription in an online environment. And a third article I want to introduce is from 4 years ago. This is on Iran's election and the use of Twitter in the Iranian election. And I mention that article because it has 14 citations at this point in Google Scholar. And these students are thrilled by the notion that they are being cited, and that their articles are part of this Google Scholar community. They're very interested in the idea that STS can be a field of research, and not necessarily, most of them, a source of professional, as it were, growth or development. The students I work with are as interested in working at MTV and McKinsey as they are in going into graduate school. The students I work with are interested in nonprofits. And what I think they see at STS is a way of thinking about their own distinguishing, as it were, thinking about their own contribution. What is it that I'm going to bring to these organizations and industries? What is it that I have to offer? And I think that STS is a way of thinking about the world rather than a particular professional practice. Thank you very much.
Please consider what you do. The full range of your scholarship. What sorts of resistances, ruptures, controversies, and sometimes successes do your scholarly initiatives produce? What are the return flows of statements, techniques, and even devices that your activities generate? How do you, as an STS scholar, string together your engagements in your fields of study with reflexive learning to ground your next involvement? Thanks to Halbala for staying this long. Got the reception gone over there. And thank you very much to our 8. Please join me in thanking